All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and go through a couple of these problems for application, just to kind of explain some of the steps and processes for these. I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance if you hear any really crazy sounds. My children are home and you never know what you're going to hear. All right, so right now I'm going to do number one. Seems really simple, but I want to emphasize precision here. Derek is hang gliding on a clear day. Use the formula for visibility, V equals 1.225 square root of A, to find the altitude at which Derek is hang gliding. So we're given two variables here, visibility and altitude. And so it tells us right now that we need to find the altitude, which means we're solving for A. So I can approach this problem two different ways. I can take the original problem that I'm given, V equals 1.225 square root A, and I can just go ahead and rearrange this equation right here for A, since that's what I'm solving for. And then I can just go ahead and substitute in at the end. So let's try that. So if I was to go ahead and rearrange this equation for A, what I would go ahead and do is I would divide both sides by 1.225. And that would cancel out over here. And so then I'd have V over 1.225, and that's equal to the square root of A. Now, what I could do from there to get A by itself, I have to undo the square root, so I have to go ahead and square both sides. So that gets me A is equal to V over 1.225. All of this is squared, not just the V, not just the 1.225, but the whole thing. So that gets me that solve for A. Now that I have that solve for A, I could go ahead and drop that 67.1 that I have right here, over here, for it says V is 67.1. So if I did that, I would go ahead and substitute right on in there, and I'd say A is equal to, and then I'd say 67.1 over 1.225, and I'd square that. So I can go ahead and put that into my calculator, which if I did that, I'm going to go ahead, parentheses, get my calculator and my fraction, and then I'm going to go 67.1 over 1.225. Oop, drop the 5. There we go. And parenthesis and squared. And that gives me 3,000.3565, so 3,000.357. So A equals 3,000.357 feet. That's going to be our unit is feet. Okay, so that's one way of solving that. And I recognize that that might be a more challenging way for some people because it's dealing with rearranging an equation that isn't just a bunch of numbers, but is multiple variables. And that can be a challenge for some people. So another way that we can do that is by initially taking the problem and substituting in V. So that would be where we have 67.1 is equal to 1.225 times the square root of A. So now I don't have two variables. I just have one, and I'm only solving for the A. I'm going to follow the same procedure here where I'm going to divide both sides by 1.225. And that would get me, if I put that in the calculator, that would get me some decimal. Let's do that. So if I just did 67.1 divided by 1.225, oops, it's not a decimal. If I did that, I get this. And you see how that's a non-terminating decimal? What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to keep it exact. If I was to round that off to like 54.7, for example, or even 54.8, if I was to do that, my answer at the end would be entirely different. And let me show you what I mean by that. Right now, if I was to go ahead and just change that to, like I said, it was 54.77. So let's make that 54.8. I'm just going to show you. 54.8 is equal to the square root of A. And so the last step would be to go ahead and square both sides. So if I did 54.8 and I squared that, that would get me A. So if I square 54.8, I get 3003.04. But our actual answer, when we kept it exact in our original form over here and substituted in at the end and didn't round until the very end, was actually 3000.357. So that's actually a pretty significant difference. So it's incredibly important that we keep things exact. So instead of rounding to 54.8 there, what I want you to do is to do exactly what I'm saying, is keep it exact. So at that step, instead, I'm going to keep that as 67.1 over 1.225. Decimal digit. Oh, keep it like that is equal to the square root of a. And then when we square both sides, we still have it exact right here. So it's that 67.1 over 1.225 is all squared is equal to a. That's going to get me the exact same thing, because if you see this step right here is exactly to this one. We did not round or anything like that, and I would take that, put that in the calculator, and get exactly the same thing. So it's very important that we're precise and we are not rounding until the very end. So our answer here is this 3000.357. Again, I'd get the exact same thing because these are the same exact inputs. Okay, let's look at another problem. So number 2 right here. The surface area of a cone is found using the formula S equals pi r square root r squared plus h squared. Find h for the cone below. Use pi equals 3.14. If it does not say to use 3.14 for pi, then I want you to use pi. Here, I will only use 3.14 because it specifies that I'm to use that. So here, I'm going to go ahead, take the formula, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to recognize that it asks me to solve for h. I've got h right here. I also have an s right here, so that's going to go in for this s. And I have an r right here as the 6 centimeters right here. So I have all of my variables except for h, so I'm going to go ahead and substitute in. So I have 1,884 is equal to pi, but we're putting 3.14 times r, which is 6, times the square root of r squared. So I'm going to do 6 squared plus h squared. Okay, so I've got that right there. So now my first step would be, let me go ahead and combine this 3.14 and 6. So that's going to get me 1884 is equal to 1884. I'm sorry, 18.84. 3.14 times 6 is 18.84. Times the square root of 6 squared. You know what? Actually, let's go ahead and make that into 36. 6 squared is 36 plus h squared. Okay. All right. Now I've got that. Now, again, I've got to solve for h. So in order to get h by itself, I also have to get rid of the radical. In order to get rid of the radical, I have to get the radical by itself. It is not currently by itself. So I need to get this 1884 over to the other side. So I'm going to do that by division of 18.84 to both sides. That is not how you write 8. Okay, there we go. And so once I do 1884 divided by 18.84, I get exactly 100. 100 is equal to the square root of 36 plus h squared. Now my radical is by itself over here. Now that it's by itself, there's nothing on the outside. Now I can go ahead and square both sides. I'm running out of a little bit of room here, so I'm going to kind of scoot over here. So when I have that 100 squared, that gets me 10,000 is equal to 36 plus h squared. Okay, so now I got to go ahead again, get h by itself. So I'm going to subtract both sides by 36. So subtract 36 from both sides. And that will go ahead and get me 9,964. And that's equal to h squared. Now, my last step to get h by itself is I've got to go ahead and square root both sides. So I'm going to square root and square root. Now, keep in mind, I'm undoing a square by taking a square root to both sides. So I have to remember anytime I do that, that gets me a plus or minus. And so this would be plus or minus the square root of 9,964. Now, in context of the problem here, I cannot have a negative height. So that's really kind of a null answer right there. I can only have the positive, but it is important to remember, again, anytime you're undoing a square by taking a square root to both sides, you have a plus or minus. So right here, my height is actually going to be the positive square root of 9,964. And when we put that into the calculator, that gets me 99.820 centimeters. So that is our answer. All right. Now, I'm also going to rework this problem itself without substituting in for S and R. I'm just going to take the equation, rearrange it, and solve it before substituting in. Again, it works either way, whatever works for the way that you like to do these problems. It's up to you. Each person has their own preference. So let me write it off to the side over here. So I've got S equals pi r square root r squared plus h squared. I'm going to leave pi as pi for right now, and then I would substitute it in as 3.14 at the end, if that's how you would choose to do this. Again, I am solving for h right here, so I've got to get everything away from that. So my first step here would be to go ahead and divide both sides by pi r. So I'm going to do that, get rid of that. So that gets me s over pi r is equal to the square root of r squared plus h squared. Again, I'm solving for this h squared right here. So I've got to go ahead and get rid of the radical so I can go ahead and square both sides. And that gets rid of the radical over here. And now I have s over pi r, and the whole thing has to be squared. It's not just part of it, but the entire thing. So it needs to stay in parentheses. And then that gets me r squared plus h squared. We're almost there. We've almost got h by itself. So now, since this is r squared plus h squared, I need to get rid of this r squared by subtracting it to both sides. So that's going to get me s over pi r, and all of that is squared, minus r squared. And that minus r squared got it away from over here, so now I'm left with h squared over here. Last and final step is, if I got to go ahead and get h by itself, is I've got to square root both sides. But it goes to everything over here, okay? So again, I'm undoing a square by taking a square root to both sides. So that gets me a plus or minus the square root of s over pi r squared minus r squared. And that gets me h. Again, I don't think a lot of people are going to want to do it that way, but if it works for you, it works for you. And honestly, in the long run, I think it would work for you better. Last final step on that was, because it said to use 3.14, then that's exactly what we would do, is we would put 3.14 right here for this. And honestly, when we go to plug it in, we can go ahead and just plug that information in. For example, we know in this problem that S is 1,884. So I could go, okay, 1,884 divided by 3.14. And then times R, which was 6. All of that is squared minus R squared, so 6 squared. And all of that is square rooted. Let's put it in the calculator. So let's do that. All right, there we go. I put it in the calculator, got the whole thing in there all in one move, and it gets us 99.8198. And sure enough, if I came back over here to what we had over here, the square root of 9,964 is what it simplified down to. So let's do that. Square root of 9,964, enter. Look at that. They're exactly the same. So like I said, either way works. Whatever way works for your brain works for you. That's good.